Welcome to Provocative Conversations. Hello, Dr. Alicia.
Hi, Dr. Renee. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good. I'm very excited about this topic, not because it's an exciting topic, but because it's very informative. And our goal is to always hashtag be informed and also to provoke action as well as to provoke awareness. So I'm very excited about this sensitive but very necessary conversation. And I'm also glad to report that we are expanding globally with our audience. So we
Wow.
have Canada, Trinidad and Tobago, Germany, Russia. So
Hmm.
we're really, really expanding. So very
It's
excited about
wonderful.
that. Mm-hmm.
I'll have to learn how to say hello in all those languages.
Mm-hmm. I used to live in Germany. I could say Guten Tag.
Guten Tag.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we just had President's Day in America on Monday. And so that is the precipice for this conversation so that we can recognize that, yes, we have presidents, and America is a great country for some people and sometimes. But even at our best, we still have historical information where we have had leaders politically who, although they have done great things for mankind, great things for our country, but they have also done very bad things to individuals in their life, strictly because of their political power. So we want to emphasize here that our discussion is about men in power who have done good things are often given a pass for the bad things that they do. And so we want to make sure that everyone is informed about this bad behavior, because whenever we overlook it by the general public, it allows one, not only other or future political perpetrators to rape, knowing that there will be no or little to no consequence or punishment to them, but it also allows the current victims and the future victims to be ignored, to be punished, shamed, or even blamed instead of protected. And whenever we allow these good presidents or good leaders to not be held responsible for their bad actions, what we do is we normalize sexual violence, we reinforce gender inequalities, and we also blame the victims as the true perpetrators rather than the victims in all of this. And in addition to that, we want to make sure we give a voice to the victims to empower both the victims and the at risk persons on how to legally and psychologically protect themselves.
That's right. And before we begin into the specifics of our episode, I do want to mention that we are going to be discussing some very troublesome topics that involve rape, sexual assault, and imbalances of power. So please be aware of this before you listen so that you're prepared to listen for these kinds of topics. I have volunteered as a board member for our county's Victim Services and Rape Crisis Counseling Center, and I'm also personally a victim of sexual assault. I know that you're also involved in some of these areas, Dr. Renee.
Yes, I am. I am. Was the sexual assault with the political person or in the workplace?
No, it was when I was younger. It was more of a social
Okay.
kind of situation.
Okay. Okay. I'm definitely sorry to hear that.
Thanks.
I have not had any personal experience with sexual trauma, but during my doctoral residency, I did have specialized training in military sexual trauma. And then I used to also work with, when I was working with political candidates, helping a lot of political candidates to become aware of the need for balances and protections in sexual trafficking. And now I'm a national board member for Freedom Network USA, which is a national organization to stop the demand for human trafficking and sex trafficking, especially when it comes to children and any person, as well as spreading information that human trafficking and sex trafficking happens at in every zip code and at every age, including children as young as 1 month old. So I think it's a very intense topic. But today we're talking about presidents who have raped. So presidents who have enacted sexual trauma upon others. So are you ready to begin?
Yes, let's start.
Okay.
So today we're going to talk about some high-profile cases of presidents who've raped or were accused of sexual assault or rape. But to be clear, the statistics are very clear about rape and sexual
Mm-hmm.
assault. According to RAIN, which is a wonderful resource, every 68 seconds, someone in the US is sexually assaulted. So by the time you finish listening to that episode, that's, how many people?
Yeah. Oh, wow. At least 60.
Yeah. Also, on average, there are 463,634 victims aged 12 or older of rape and sexual assault each year in the United States. And the ages 12 to 34 are the highest risk years for rape and sexual assault. So those are just some statistics to start out, to be clear that this is a common thing that is happening, despite us talking about high profile cases. This happens to our friends, our neighbors, our loved ones. So we just need to be aware of that.
And I do also want to emphasize that doesn't just happen to females, it happens to males as well.
Yes. We've linked a lot of the research in today's episode on our website, provocativeconversationspodcast.com. But I also want to specifically mention a podcast that I've listened to called Very Presidential by Ashley Flowers. And I highly recommend this. The series has about 15 episodes that explore 15 different presidents, and the behavior of these presidents will leave you astonished and very frustrated. But some of the presidents that we're talking about today, she also covers in her episodes. So I highly recommend that if you're wanting to listen about specifically presidents. So let's just jump into the presidents we've chosen to focus on, shall we? All right. So first, let's talk about Donald Trump.
So the one and only.
Yes. I am conflicted about giving this man attention, but in this case, I think it's good to give this attention.
I agree.
So,
because we do want everyone in our listeners to know that we can be trusted to not just give information that we have censored based off of our comfort, but what we are providing based off of the truth.
Right. And there's a lot with Donald Trump. So I'm not going to get into like all of the complexities of all of the different things, but just an overview. Do you remember, Dr. Renee, back in October of 2016, when the news came out about Donald Trump talking about grabbing women by the pussy?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes, it was a very busy time for me.
Yes. So the Washington Post began that exploration of then presidential candidate Donald Trump and his inclination to sexual assault and rape. And that they published the Access Hollywood tape. So they actually taped Trump bragging about grabbing women by the pussy without their consent. And you know the phrase, when someone shows you who they are, you believe them.
That's right. Believe them. That's right. Especially if they are telling you who they are, then believe them.
Right. So Trump has been accused of sexual assault by over 19 women over the years. And according to a USA Today article, the assaults share a pattern. He gets the woman in a room, pushes her against a wall or some other surface, and forces himself on her, either with penetration or other assault. And I think you'll probably go into some of these definitions a little bit later.
Will.
So he wasn't just engaging in locker room talk, as he claimed when they exposed him, saying that he would just grab women by the pussy, because he was literally recounting his experiences assaulting women based on the patterns and the information we have. And yet he was still elected to be our president.
Right. And
yeah. I also
comment.
Right. I also wanted to mention some of the creepy things he said about his daughter, Ivanka Trump.
Oh, yes.
Because I just think it also just shows that he has very little, he's not capable of separating himself from his own desires and boundaries and
right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So
that's right.
I don't know if you remember this, but they appeared together on a 2006 The View show. And he said that if she weren't his daughter, perhaps he'd be dating her. And he also, go ahead.
I actually did I was interviewed somehow I need to go back and look at the link, but interviewing and discussing the inappropriate sexual behavior and sexual connotations that he displays and expresses toward his daughter, and where a lot of the fondling and the language that he uses, that I implied that I was concerned about possible, not necessarily sexual abuse, but definitely sexually inappropriate behavior. And if you look at women who are older, but they have fathers who groomed them sexually, you can recognize that they are very comfortable with having these physical boundaries intercepted. And if they're patting them on the butt, giving them longer kisses on the lips, talking about them sexually or in a sexual reference or tone, then you can kind of tell that they are used to that. They've been groomed for that. And so to them, it seems natural.
Normal.
But when it comes on a very high profile platform, like speaking at a conference or the Republican convention, where you can see those pats, you can see those kisses, everyone else is appalled because it's not normal nor healthy or appropriate. But I do believe that there has been a history of sexual inappropriate behavior, not only with other women, but definitely with his daughter. And I'll have to find the link and we can add that to my commentary that I gave for that, for the body language.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah.
I also found a comment he said on Howard Stern's radio show in 1999. And this is a quote: "I have a deal with her." That's Ivanka. "She's 17 and doing great, Ivanka. She made me a promise, swear to her that I would never date a girl younger than her. So as she grows older, the field is getting very limited."
Yes,
I
saw
mean,
that
she
quote.
was 17.
Yeah, and the fact that she had to make her father promise that means that she was very well exposed to and expecting of him having inappropriate sexual behavior, that she had to make a plea, can you please don't do this for anyone who's younger than me, because she herself knew that it was gross.
Right. Yeah. Disturbing to say the least. So
Yes.
that's Donald Trump. Like I said, the 19 women, there are a variety of different accusations, from penetration to touching. So you can check out the links that we share about those if you'd like to dig in a little deeper there. So I'd like to move on to another modern day president, Bill Clinton. And we all know Bill Clinton as the 42nd president of the United States when he served 1993 to 2001. But probably most of us remember the Monica Lewinsky scandal in his presidency.
Yes.
So even looking past that, I'm not saying we're dismissing that because I'll readdress that in a second, but he also was publicly accused of sexual assault and or sexual misconduct by several women. So Juanita Broderick accused Clinton of raping her in 1978. Leslie Millwee accused Clinton of sexually assaulting her in 1980. Paula Jones accused Clinton of exposing himself to her in 1991, as well as sexually harassing her. Kathleen Wiley accused Clinton of groping her without her consent in 1993. And I just want to point out, this seems to be a pattern as well. So we just talked about Trump's patterns and how he, has this sort of MO. Well, so does Clinton here. Clinton has repeatedly denied these accusations, and we'll see this a lot too, also discrediting the women who have accused him. And going back to Lewinsky, so she was a White House intern at the time of the so-called consensual relationship. And because of, this power imbalance, which we'll talk about a little bit more, between a president and an intern, by the way, she was only 22 at the time. Some argue that this is at the very minimum sexual misconduct. I don't even know why that's an argument. If you are in a position of power, if I am a boss and I have an employee and, we are engaged in a sexual relationship, that would definitely be sexual misconduct.
That's correct.
Sorry. So, yeah. This is a symptom of power and getting away with this kind of misconduct with little repercussions, like you talked about earlier. So there was Bill Clinton. So those were just a couple of the modern day presidents. There are clearly more. Like when I was searching through, I just couldn't believe the number of, a lot of the information are accusations. So very few have actually been in trouble for any of the sexual misconduct that they're accused of. But there's just...
and I do want to also clarify from the definition of accusation. It minimizes any potential for actual accountability or being charged. But as a political advisor and doing crisis management work, I'm very much aware of how much unethical advisors can put pressure on victims to recant stories, to bribe them, or to put so much stress on them that it's easier for the victim to just go someplace and just hide because they can't go against this big political machine that is attacking them, and which creates another form of rape because they are re-victimized and not able to tell their story and are now having to live with this guilt of not being able to voice what truly happened for a secondary fear that they will be raked over the coals by the media or the people who do love the president who did something good. So even if it's an accusation, I think it's very important to still take it seriously because there's usually at least an inkling of truth in a claim that's being made, especially when it comes to something about rape and there's sperm or addresses or other evidence that can be used to support the accusation as being valid.
So this next president actually is an example of what you're talking about.
Okay.
Grover Cleveland. So Grover Cleveland served as the 22nd and then again as the 24th president of the United States from 1885 to 1889 and then 1893 to 1897. So we're talking, back in the day. Before he was president, he was also elected as sheriff of Erie County, New York, and he was elected to that in 1871 at age 33. He then went on to become mayor of Buffalo, New York in 1882. And then, this is really interesting, he moved from being the mayor to being the governor of New York in the same year. And then 3 short years later, took office as president. And I don't know about you, Dr. Renee, but it seems pretty typical that he was able to move from mayor to Buffalo to president in just a few short years. At a young age,
That's
no
usually
less.
the pattern.
So his story, though, of success is not just a bunch of sunshine because there is a woman who suffered from his power and control. So there's a wonderful Vice article that we're linking to. And it according to them, the anti-corruption Democrat was only president for 8 years, but he was a rapist who denied he had fathered a child for much longer.
They said that. That's good.
Yep. So let's talk about Maria Halpin.
Okay.
She's a 38-year-old woman who met Cleveland on the street in Buffalo, New York in 1873. So note the date there. He was sheriff at the time. Cleveland had been so-called courting Halpin for months. You might wonder about that.
Right.
It sounds to me maybe a little bit of harassment was happening.
Right. And stalking.
Perhaps. And when he saw her on the street, he invited her to dinner, walking her back to her home. And in an affidavit that Halpin submitted, she alleges that when they arrived to the house, Cleveland raped her, quote, by use of force and violence and without my consent.
And let me just interject very quickly. First of all, when we talk about the incidents and the effect of power, then the power dynamics of him just being the sheriff. How are you as a citizen, as a civilian, not going to tell the sheriff, no, I don't need you to walk me someplace? So there's those power dynamics that come along with just being a police officer in the military or paramilitary alone, that natural people are then made at risk for victimizations such as this. So go ahead.
That just made me think of a quick story that happened to me, which me and one of my best friends, we were young, like 18, 19. We lived in a little place, just the two of us girls. And we were driving through our small town and we got pulled over by a cop. And I think it was just like a headlight was out or something, something really minor. So we got a ticket, which at the time I was broke. So getting a ticket was like, oh man, how am I going to pay this stupid ticket?
Right.
And so we were kind of bummed. We got this ticket and we went back to our house, which was only a couple blocks away from where we got pulled over. And we were lamenting about our ticket, but whatever,
Right.
You're young, you can get over those things.
Pretty quick. Yeah.
Yeah. Not only maybe just a few minutes later, no more than 30 minutes later, get a knock at the door. We open it up and it's the officer.
Oh, wow.
And he says, which first of all, we were like, why is this guy here?
Right.
And I think maybe we had some friends over or something. So like luckily there were other people there, which I don't think he was expecting, but he was he said something like, I can't even remember. I'd have to ask my best friend, but he basically tore up the parking or the traffic ticket and alluded to something like that. It felt like he was asking for an exchange or something. And we were just very much like, no, thank you. Shut the door.
Yeah.
But we never did get that traffic ticket, but it was really creepy, because
there would have been no reason for him to follow you. They have your address when they run your tags,
right?
And so, or look at your driver's license. So there would have been no reason for him to follow you and to tear it up unless he was like seeking ulterior motives. Well, I'm very grateful that you had other people inside the home so that nothing happened.
Right. Because if it had gone a different way, where it had just been one of us and we were home alone, like, I don't know what might have happened, but that's moment of feeling like this imbalance of power, like he has the power to give us a ticket or not give us a ticket. I'm a broke 18-year-old who can't really afford a ticket, so it was really weird, but fortunately nothing bad happened in that situation. Well, unfortunately for Maria Halpin, however, she found herself pregnant 6 weeks after the rape. And remember, this is in the 1800s. She was unmarried, so she had to seek help because, she didn't have many options.
Right.
So Cleveland did anything but help her. He was able to use his position of power to coerce and basically scare her into giving her son up for adoption to an orphanage. And then she was paid off to leave town. So I can't even imagine this scenario. Yeah. But she actually didn't feel right about leaving town. And no wonder, like, I don't know how she must have felt, but that was like, you had mentioned this before, but that was like an act of violence on top of an act of violence, right? Well, there's even more. It gets worse. So she went to get her son from the orphanage, and she basically just took him. Like, she didn't ask permission.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I'm like, hell yeah, Halpin.
That's
go,
right.
Girl. Go get your baby.
Of course you would say that.
But of course, that maybe wasn't the best decision. I understand where she's coming from, but Cleveland caught wind of her, getting her son and used his power to send a search party after her and the baby.
What?
The baby was forcibly seized and returned to the orphanage to be put up for adoption. Maria was then violently dragged to the Providence Lunatic Asylum under the pretense of anomania. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Which is a now debunked mental condition that counted excessive drinking, uncontrolled impulses, and strangeness as symptoms.
Oh, wow.
She was in that asylum for 3 days, but she was found obviously to be sane and then was released. Wow. And doctors did regard this incarceration, which is basically what it was, without warrant, and did note it as an abuse of power by Cleveland.
Who, good.
Yeah. But then he's the same Cleveland who 10 years later would run for president on an anti-corruption platform, of all things. And
of course.
So poor Maria Halpin. If there's anything, God rest her soul, but that was some pretty violent tragedy that happened to her that is just sort of swept under the rug. He became a president. He was president twice. He ran on anti-corruption of all things. So hypocritical.
Very much so. And I want to add that just because a victim or someone who is labeled as an accuser takes the money that was given, it does not imply that they were just money driven or that they were making it up. Sometimes they need to be able to have that money because everything else has been taken from them. Their job, their sense of security, their being put in danger, or their reputation. So they may need that money to just relocate someplace else and have a way to start over. I remember even having a sexual trauma victim in the military, and the man raped her behind a garbage can, one of those big garbage cans, and then he threw $50 at her.
Oh, God.
And the one reason why she felt so guilty was because she took the $50 and she was thinking, I needed the money, so I took it. But she felt so guilty that because she did, it meant that she was asking for it or that she was okay with it. And so I want to encourage anyone, if you are a victim or have been relabeled as simply an accuser and you did take the money, it is not an indication that you were lying or that you just made it up to get money or to attack a president or to attack another leader. I can understand that it might have been your way of saying, well, at least let me have this so I can start over. Or I do have a real financial need and I can still benefit from the money without giving my agreement that this was okay for the rape to happen. So I want to let every victim know that it was not your fault, even if you did take the money.
Or sign an NDA or whatever.
That's correct. That's right.
That was something that Trump used, from what I read, a lot. Like, oh, well, they signed an NDA, which means that, they knew what was going on or whatever. Like, it's
right. And that's still coercion. Exactly. If I'm doing a testimony for like an expert testimony, if I can, through psychological analysis, show that the person was being coerced to sign an NDA or coerced to accept money or to do X, Y, Z, that act of coercion then makes that other person a true perpetrator of whatever the act was. And so an NDA in and of itself does not release you from being guilty of what you did. Anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I think this next situation is not the same, but it is a similar idea of like somebody being kind of stuck at the will of another person. So we're going to talk next about Thomas Jefferson.
Okay.
And I saved this one for last because this one is a president that so many people love. He was our third president. Right. Many know him as, the beloved president who drafted the Declaration of Independence. He was the father of the University of Virginia. And, people go visit Monticello and, he just is definitely embedded in the history of the United States. But there are some horrifying aspects to Jefferson's life and lifestyle that are often glossed over or rewritten to ignore some of the hard truths, though I'm happy to say that now that's changing. There's more and more exposure about some of these things that Jefferson did. So probably many people have heard the name Sally Hemings. She was Jefferson's slave. They did meet in Paris, where she was actually free, but then she moved with him to Virginia, where she was then enslaved. And by the way, she was only 14 when they met. So there's like this idea, there's this romanticizing of their relationship.
Right. Exactly.
She was
Which
14.
was the impetus for this conversation.
Yes. She was only 14. So even if there was like something consensual, I mean, I hate to even say that, but people are like, oh, well, they were in love or whatever. She was 14. Come on. She was a child. And
also you have to think about, one, yes, she was a child. Two, we don't know what the conversation was. He may have said, I have a job for you in this new event. We don't know what she agreed to, but this is the problem of why we allow good people or good presidents to get a pass for their bad behavior, because there is a misinformation or a lack of information of what really happened. And because regardless of the century, people are still giving these passes to presidents who have coerced, taken advantage of, or manipulated women or other or men as well, then it makes easier in person's minds later on to say, well, maybe she really was in love with him. She was 14, she was being fast or grown, and she knew what she wanted. So, I think this is a very essential and important conversation, because once we let everyone know and expose the truth that it doesn't matter what the circumstances was, if the forced rape or forced sexual act happened, regardless of who it was rape.
Exactly.
Okay.
And like I said, many have romanticized the relationship, calling her his mistress, who's basically a live-in lover. I mean, come on, that just makes me so infuriated. But the truth of the matter is that she was a slave who didn't have true consent.
Sorry. I was just thinking about a cute, probably 14-year-old girl. Why would she want some and I think she was half mixed. She was why would she want some wrinkled up, white penis, from an old man? Like, I doubt that was her.
I wondered how long it was
going
to take to have you hear you say penis, but
I know. Oh yeah. Like, I really doubt that was I'm going to have me some wrinkled up penis. That's what I'm searching for. I'm leaving Paris. So just think about it from just even a social standpoint. Anyway,
right. I mean, she was young, she was free, and you're right. She was a daughter of a plantation owner, a white man, and an enslaved woman. I'm not sure how I don't know all of her biography, but I'm not sure how she ended up in Paris, but I agree. Like, you have to really put it in context.
Right.
And not to mention this was like, a long time ago. So things weren't even as progressive as they are now in terms of like what's acceptable. Right.
Right. And also Paris is the country, the land of love. So even using, she was from Paris, it was romantic. Right. So there's all these psychological subliminal information and cues people are using to retell history, to romanticize the rape that happened between her and Jefferson.
Yep. So, yeah, she was, in all truthfulness, a slave, and that's slaves were not consenting to what happened to them just by the nature of, and you're going to go into like some of that stuff. So Jefferson essentially was able to rape her whenever he wanted. He had full access to her, and in fact impregnated her with 6 children who were also born into slavery. Some people are like, oh, well, they were freed. Yeah, that doesn't they were eventually freed. Some of them only, though, were like the 2 youngest I read were only freed when he died because it was in his will. So, I mean, come on, that's not like
the
him
fact
being...
that they were born enslaved means that they were not a mistress and chosen lover situation.
Exactly. Like, if it was you are my mistress, we are having children, they should have been born free, right?
That's correct.
And she should have been free, not a slave. Correct. I don't know.
Yes. And not living in I don't know if you found them, but I do have the pictures of where they were able to excavate like the room where she was. That was horrible conditions, pretty much like a dungeon and the bottom. So it's like, if we were really lovers, then I'm really not getting a good deal out of this. If I'm being stuck in this dungeon and being forced to have children and being raped at your whim.
Yeah. And actually, Monticello, which is where you're talking about, where Thomas Jefferson lived and where Sally Hemings lived, they're curating the situation. So they're basically putting a focus on Sally Hemings, which is wonderful. But
Yes.
when I was reading an article about, it's on their website and we're going to link to it. They were really having a struggle with calling it rape or not. So, because there are many who are like, no, this is,
and I'm definitely going to get into
absolutely,
that as well.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are some who are like, well, we don't know if it was or not. It could have been consensual or whatever.
Right.
So they've opted for rape with a question mark, but to be clear, under Virginia law, Hemmings was Jefferson's property. No portraits or photos of Hemmings exists. And like other women who were abused by power and sexual assault, she's kind of a hidden figure. And yet, she was, I don't know, she was Thomas Jefferson's property. And, it hopefully today, by talking about her and, just continuing to discuss her name and Maria Halpin's name and others, we're going to give these victims some justice.
Yes, yes, yes. And also educate listeners so that we don't get stuck into giving additional passes or retroactive passes. So let's begin with what is a mistress. So a mistress is someone who chooses to have a sexual lover for the benefit of an emotional encounter or an emotional relationship, or it could just be a sexual relationship. But that man is married legally to someone else. And he is also choosing to have an extramarital relationship with a woman who has chosen to be in this relationship with him. So a mistress is someone who chooses her lover or who chooses to remain with her lover. When you are an enslaved person, you don't choose lovers. You are being forced to have sex, which means that you are raped. And it is not a lover mistress situation. It is indeed a victim and a perpetrator of rape. So that is what a true mistress is. So when we talk about Sally Hemings, it's easier psychologically. Remember, we talk repeatedly about cognitive dissonance. It's hard for people to separate a good person doing something bad or atrocious. So what we do to still hold on to the good is we subliminally and consciously minimize the bad, add the question mark to it, or just act as if it never happened so that we can maintain the good, which was rightful acts of good or justice and advocacy. But we can then say, okay, well, they're not all bad. So since they're not all bad because they've done all these good things, then it had to have been a mistress. She had to have wanted it. Or maybe this really didn't happen at all. And this is some more critical race theory or more lies and propaganda to defame our beloved president or our beloved political leader. So one, if you are an enslaved person, you are not consenting to anything because you have been enslaved. And therefore, whether it's being forced to cook a meal or forced to have sex, that sex was an indeed rape, a mistress lover situation. Often what happens is when people use mistress in history, then they use it as a way to not glorify the rape, but instead to minimize the rape and act as if it was a consensual sexual agreement. And they minimize the atrocious act of the president, often saying, as you said, Dr. Alicia, that she quote unquote wanted it. And if you said that she wanted it, or she was asking for it, or she was in love with him, then you're minimizing the actual act that did happen. And this is similar to common court defense that we have in present day. So instead of the victim being believed, the victim has to now prove, no, I did not want it. I did not ask for it. And this was in no way anything that I desired or agreed to. So the emphasis now comes on shaming the victim rather than holding the perpetrator of the rape accountable. And a lot of rapists also believe, when we get into the psychology of a rapist, that, oh, well, she really did want it. And so because they allow themselves to believe that what they believe gives them the permission to go and force a person to have sex with them. Also, when we talk historically about mistresses and presidents, it implies that there was a relationship. And thinking of neurolinguistics or neuropsychology with language, what happens is that if you hear a particular word, it causes an automatic thought or an automatic image of what you think that word is. Once you have that image then causes you to determine how to think or how to feel about that situation or the comment that was just made. So whenever we have historical accounts saying that a person was a mistress, it implies a relationship. And when you have a relationship, it assumes that there are equal persons in this relationship. And so going forward, I encourage everyone to really examine, well, was it a relationship or was it an imbalance of power? Because often what happens when you say that an enslaved person was a mistress or had a relationship with the slave owner, then it minimizes the imbalance of power that not only enslaved persons, but also modern day victims have had to face. Also, if they say, well, okay, maybe it was a relationship, but it was an assault, we'll give you that. The fact of saying it was an assault and not blatantly and explicitly saying that it was a rape, it minimizes the degree of responsibility of the president or other political leaders or anyone. And it also increases the victimization of the actual victim and allows that person to have a freedom of entitlement to continue to rape or to sexually assault going forward. So let's back up and give some definitions of sexual assault versus harassment and sexual abuse.
So, Dr. Renee, I did just peek at a history.com article about Hemmings because I was curious about how she ended up in Paris, because that's what everybody says, Paris, Paris, Paris. Right. According to written accounts from her son, Madison, she accompanied the Jeffersons to France in 1787. That's when she was 14 years old. And she saw that there was like freedom there. And so he actually asked her to return back 2.5 years later. So she was 16 and she refused. But somehow he was able to convince her to come back. She was 16 and then she was already pregnant with his child.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so he promised her that she would be given extraordinary privileges and that the children would all be freed by age of 21. And so that's kind of how she ended up. Because I was kind of curious, like everybody just says they met in Paris.
That is interesting. Yeah, like, no, exactly. They're romanticizing.
Yeah. So I wanted just to be clear about that. So sorry, let's go on to some definitions.
Okay. No. That was good information. But then I do want to add with that even if she was able to leave and then refuse to come back, the fact that he coerced her to come back, she's 16 and pregnant. Like, what other options did she really have? And if this person is the leader or the president, she probably believed, as a naive 16-year-old would, that, okay, well, maybe, he will be different now that we have a baby, or now things will be different. So, adding that information into it as well. Okay, so that was the definition for sexual harassment. Sexual abuse, in contrast to sexual harassment, sexual abuse and sexual molestation are mainly used to describe sexual behavior toward children and not adults. And all 50 states have laws that recognize that children, which is anyone under the age of 18, are not capable of giving an informed consent to any sex act, including Sally Hemings at 14 and 16. And in the United States, the age at which consent can be given ranges from 16 to 18 years of age. Also, sexual abuse can include many different things, from touching or fondling a victim in a sexual manner to actually forcing the victim or the child to touch something or to look at something, any body parts, or to watch a sexual activity, or even if it's just to fondle the other person. Sexual abuse of a child is indeed a criminal act. And regardless if anyone says, oh, well, she wanted it, or she was older for her age, or she was well experienced, it is not true. The person is still a child, and they did not have the emotional intelligence or the intellectual ability to make that informed decision. And therefore, there was an imbalance of power that was being used by the adult or the older person to force this child to have sex or to engage in a sexual activity. The same thing as with rape. So when you look at sexual assault, there are different types of rape that happen. Penetrative rape is when the vagina is penetrated by the penis, finger, or other objects. Statutory rape is when the penis is touched on the vagina, but no penetration takes place. So when you have someone who has a charge of statutory rape, this is what happened. So the penis was touched by the vagina, but there was no actual penetration. Marital rape is when rape occurs within marriage. And a lot of people think, which we'll get into as far as the myths about rape, that wives cannot be raped, but indeed they can. And it's called marital rape. You're still being forced to do it. Okay. Date rape is when rape occurs during an exploratory, platonic, romantic meeting between a man and a woman, when often an intoxicating agent is mixed in the food or the drink of the victim to then rape her. Now, date rape can also happen if you're just having popcorn and ginger ale, but the person still forces himself upon the other person. Gang rape is when it's more than one person who has penetrative rape with the victim. And male rape is when one man rapes another man. Now, the myth about rape is that only men rape. And that's not true. Both men and women can rape. And what happens is that whether the female is engaging in penetrative rape by either sticking something into the man's anus or manually stimulating him so that he becomes aroused, and then she then jumps on him or forces him to engage in something, that's still where a woman can rape. I've unfortunately seen many experiences of where even grandmothers have caused their children, their grandchildren, to engage in sexual acts because they forced them to through their sense of power and authority as the relationship hierarchy elder. People also have a misbelief or the myth that with rape, that all rapists are crazy and deranged and somewhere in an institution. But as we are showing here, you can be highly intelligent and highly successful, even becoming president of the United States, and indeed not be crazy, but still be a rapist. People often think another myth is that rape is always about sexual pleasure, when indeed it is not. Rape is more of an indication of power and dominance and control, and less about pleasure. Of course, there's often an orgasm involved from the perpetrator's standpoint, but it doesn't mean that his main goal was to just have an orgasm and force this woman to be a part of it, or this man to be a part of it. Another myth is that the victim could have prevented it. This is what a lot of victims think. Well, maybe if I didn't dress this way, maybe if I didn't go to that party, maybe if I didn't go on that date, or maybe if I didn't say this or say that, or maybe if the sun wasn't shining, they always somehow believe that the rape was their fault. But as a psychologist, when we're doing not guilty by reason of an insanity pleas, especially or even when it comes to instances of rape or sexual assault, what we were able to show is that a normal, healthy person who is considerate of others or considerate of mankind will not see a naked woman running down the street or walking down the street, and then his or her immediate thought will be, I'm going to go rape that person. A normal, healthy person will not go and say, there's a young child who's in a bathing suit and her top fell off. She wants me to rape her. So what we're saying and proving is that there is nothing that you can do to make someone rape you. And therefore, it is a myth that you could have then also prevented it. It doesn't matter what you wear or what you don't wear, what you say or what you don't say. If a person is forcing himself upon you or herself upon you, to engage in sex or sexual activity, then that is indeed rape. And the reason why we mention you being a healthy or unhealthy person by seeing a victim is just showing that even when the person is having active acts of schizophrenia, they're not going to say, oh, wow, I am deranged and I see a person running down the street naked. Even in a state of psychosis, their act or their thought is not going to be, I'm going to rape that person because they want to be raped. So in no instance is the act of rape a psychological disorder, nor is any instance of rape a person having asked for that to happen. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that sadly, our culture just sort of also puts that sort of victim blaming, like, everybody's like, oh, well, she was drinking or she was,
that's right,
asking for it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
and
also,
when we,
yeah,
go ahead. And
no,
when
I was
you're
just
doing,
gonna say it's just more, it's also not just a person saying I should have done this or that. It's also society.
It's also society. That's right.
Feeding
and
that to that person.
And that's what happens. Look at Monica Lewinsky. So yes, we have a president, we have an intern. We don't know all of the details of actually what happened. We do have accounts of what they say, but there was more press trying to shame Monica than it was for making President Clinton responsible for his abuse of power and for his sexual inappropriate behaviors. And we do that, especially when the president has done a lot of good things for many people. It's easier to blame a no-name victim than to bring down or speak negatively of a president who has done a lot of good. So let's get into the psychology of a rapist. So rape and other forms of sexual assault are always traumatic and demeaning to the victim. However, although it's traumatic and demeaning, there is not one specific psychological profile of the rapist. We just know what's standard when it comes to the victim. However, when looking at studies of self-reports from rapists who are able to report anonymously their behaviors and motivations, we do see some common characteristics. So, in general, most rapists will show a lack of empathy, narcissism, feelings of hostility towards women, and they will also assert dominance over women to create a sense of fake or false masculinity. We also want everyone to also understand that rape is most often in race or same race, meaning that an Indian person will most likely rape another Indian person, or a Black person will rape another Black person. So these are some of the common characteristics. But Dr. Alicia, when I mentioned a lack of empathy, narcissism, feelings of hostility towards women, and an attempt to create a sense of masculinity, does that remind you of any presidents?
Yes.
So, not just, our past president Trump, but most persons who are president of the United States or president of a large corporation do have some levels of alpha personalities, of narcissism, where it's all about me and this is how we got here. And they therefore then may have feelings of hostility or resentment toward other people. Now, when you have a man who becomes president, and then he also has these feelings of narcissism at a higher level because he is the president and he knows he holds the most power pretty much across the world, then he does feel entitled to act out his desires of dominance or oppression and being able to overpower women, especially if he feels as if women are second-class citizens, regardless of which country he is living in. Now, I do want to add that although there is no psychological disorder for being a rapist, there are some rapists who do have a psychological disorder, but the two are not the same. Right. Okay. Rape has to exclusively do or deal with issues of power, dominance, and violence, and it's not at all about lust. It's largely motivated by the urge to control and dominate another person. And it could also be driven by hatred and hostility towards women or effeminate men. In the instance of presidents who have quote unquote enslaved women that they are labeling or mislabeling as mistresses, it's partly about lust because they want to be able to have sex and enjoy the pleasure of that person. But instead of asking or true courting and dating, they then use their dominance and control to give into their lust of sexuality about that person. So there is lust and sexual pleasure involved in some instances of longer term rapes, such as presidents who have had enslaved women became staying with them as their forced sexual concubines. So let's go into types of racists. The Massachusetts Treatment Center Rapist Typology version 3, which is an assessment that is used for both theory and empirical data about the type of racist. It gives us a scientific model of motivating dimensions of why people will want to rape or choose to rape. An opportunistic rapist is when the offenses of rape are unplanned and they are impulsive and immediate sexual gratification is sought. So this is the person who does see the person walking around naked or this with a short skirt on, or they can be completely clothed from head to toe, but they still see a sexual desire and a sexual lust, that they are using that opportunity to go and rape the person. And usually the personal psychopathology related to this is that it's a late night, it's a female who's by herself, and there are no witnesses around. So in the case of the police officer who pulled you and your best friend over, this could have been an opportunistic rape, meaning he had no intention. He wasn't stalking you, but he saw two pretty girls. He recognized his power. He recognized their immaturity or their youthfulness and saw it as a possible opportunity, theoretically, to possibly rape. Okay. And then there was another instance of where you can have anger rapist, where the offense is driven by extreme aggression, severe violence, and a history of previous antisocial offending. So again, antisocial personality disorder does not mean you're going to be a rapist, but if you have antisocial behavioral traits, then you may be more likely to be an angry rapist. So then we also have a sexual non-sadistic rapist who is driven by sexual fantasies and urges. And we have a vindictive rapist whose predominant drive is still anger, but unlike the angry rapist, the anger and aggression is focused exclusively on women. So when we look at presidential rape, we can look at opportunistic raping, meaning that it was pleasure and it was planned, but they also have the opportunity because they have an enslaved person that they are keeping in a basement or on their property. And I do want to then lastly emphasize that rape has also been used to control and dehumanize both men and women, beginning back as far as the Roman army, who would use sex as a weapon of war. And even now, we have armies that in acts of war, at times of war, will use rape to not only terrorize enemy civilian populations, but also to demoralize their opponents' enemy troops. And sometimes, even present day, commanders will use their political and wartime power to allow their soldiers to rape women and girls as a form of reward for their effort during the war.
And weren't there like I can't remember the country, but the girls that were kidnapped?
I think it was Uganda, or I know it was more of a Nigerian. I think it was 18 Nigerian girls. Yes, that happens often and still happening. And then just to kind of wrap it up, we also had male slaves, and male slaves were also forced to have sex or they were being raped as well. And it's often by slave owners. And it was a humiliation tactic that happened often during slavery, because what they would do is they would take the biggest or the alpha male or the biggest physically dominating man within that enslaved community. They would take him out, tie him to a tree, and anally rape him, and then the other enslaved persons, especially males, would see, doesn't matter how big you are, we can still demoralize and rape you and use this power to make you feel less than a man and humiliated within your own country. Now, we don't know as many accounts of how many men were raped by slave owners, but we also know that it did happen, just like it happens now in military sexual trauma. A lot of it happens with men as well. But most presidential persons who did have enslaved persons engage in some sort of sexual assault or some sort of use or abuse of power to sexually gratify themselves or just to have dominance over a person, whether it's a pat on the butt, grabbing their vaginas, as Trump did, or having enslaved persons who actually were forced to perform oral sex, anal sex, or vaginal sex. Now, just to go a quick review over which presidents owned enslaved people, because the more likely you were to enslave people, the more likely you were also able to use oppression and force to engage in sexual activities of rape. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, Andrew Johnson, and Ulysses S. Grant. So we can go and recount all the good things that these presidents have done, but we also have to recognize the bad things of them owning enslaved people. And some of these enslaved persons were actually working inside the White House. So that was just a very quick overview of how presidents who have done great things have done very horrible things. And because they've done great things, society, the media, or historical accounts like to taint the rape as something that's romanticized as a lover, as a mistress, as consensual, or just completely erase it altogether, especially when it came to male on male rape, because they want to just maintain the glory of the good things that those presidents or that president did. Anything else you want to say, Dr. Alicia?
Well, yeah, so just on the use of political power, I think it's important to note that what we're talking about specifically today is people in positions of power. And those in power seek to stay in power. Those in power have access to resources, money, sometimes, like you said, military. In the case of the presidents we've mentioned, I've even read about some cases of like using FBI and other law enforcement, like in the case of Grover Cleveland, to help aid a cover up or whatever. And, you know, we have to think about, like, if we just situate ourselves in a scenario that's probably happened. I mean, it probably happens all the time. You're just, imagine you're a young person, you're just starting out your career, you're inspired by looking up to these people in power. You might have some idealism or altruism that got you interested in politics. Maybe you get a dream job as a legislative aide or office assistant in a political office. You're probably in awe of this person who holds the power, and they probably also are charismatic, because that's often the type of, like you mentioned.
Are.
Yeah. So then if this person starts to show signs of affection or attention, even if you don't want it, the dynamic is shifted. Like, you are now in a situation where you're basically compromised because your future and your goals are at the, hand of this person in power. So even though what we've talked about are people who have been accused of rape, or even convicted, or, I mean, I don't see that happening very often, but there are many more stories that I'm sure have never been spoken by people in this scenario. And like we said before, people who do this regularly get away with it, especially if they're in positions of power and they don't have any consequences. So they continue to behave in this manner and affect more and more people with their abuse and violence, and are repeat offenders like Trump, because they don't think anybody's ever going to call them out on it, or they're not going to get in trouble.
Right.
And
they have proof of not being called out on it.
Yeah, exactly. Deborah Turkheimer, professor at Northwestern University Pritzker School of Law and a former assistant district attorney in New York, says, how do you show that a person has, let's just say, a sense of entitlement that leads him to just take what he thinks he deserves? Is that something that can be reflected in multiple instances of misconduct? Some sexual predators who engage in patterned behavior have certain things that they say repeatedly or often. Sometimes they do the same kinds of things, so there's a particular interest in a body part or preoccupation with doing something in a certain way. So, we can see that there are patterns, especially if you're in a position of power, you're getting away with it, and nobody is basically coming forward because you are in those positions of power.
Right.
And as Dr. Renee mentioned, rape nearly exclusively has to do with issues of power and violence, and asserting one's power over more vulnerable or less powerful persons is how those people in power can use their positions to abuse and rape people. And also, it's just worth mentioning that, again, that people who do express that they've been assaulted or raped aren't heard or taken seriously. We've seen the Me Too movement that has happened over the past few years, which is sort of opening up this floodgate, basically, of people who are now coming out and saying, hey, these things happened, you have to take us seriously. And fortunately, I think that there is a culture shift happening, although I think that there is a strong effort to suppress that in our politics right now.
Right. Yes, I agree. Well, with today's episode, everyone, we thank you for listening all the way through. And our goal is to help everyone to be informed and to recognize that even quote unquote good presidents can and have done bad things, including rape. And whenever we allow that part of history or these current events to be overlooked, it gives permission and power to future rapists. So we want each of us to become informed or more informed that together we can be provoked into effective action. We wanted to also today highlight not only political history, but also inform and provoke our great listeners to help in stopping the romanticizing and normalizing of rape and sexual assault by political leaders, and to also help protect and prevent sexual victimization for women and men, for boys and girls, strictly because someone has political power.
I also just wanted to mention just a couple of small things. Don't participate in blaming the victim. Listen to what people say when they say they've been a victim. And if you are involved in some kind of sexual trauma, we'd like to share the National Sexual Assault Hotline, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that number is 1-800-656-4673. So, Dr. Renee, thanks for yet again a wonderful conversation.
Very
even if the
provoking.
Topic was not, is a heavy one, but it's important for us to continue these conversations.
Yes. And again, we want to make sure we're talking about uncomfortable topics that others are afraid or being censored from talking about.
So, Dr. Renee, what is next week's episode going to be about?
Yes, next week we will be talking about how lynching is legal. You don't want to miss that.
I think that's a suitable follow-up topic to today's conversation. So, looking forward to next week, Dr. Renee.
Yes. Looking forward to seeing you then. We are your provocateurs. I'm Dr. Renee.
And I'm Dr. Alicia.
Be informed, be entertained, be provoked.